The carriage hit a rut in the road, and suddenly Elizabeth Hartford was airborne. One moment she was sitting properly on the bench across from the Duke of Ravenswood, trying very hard to pretend she wasn't acutely aware of his presence. The next moment, the world tilted violently, and she found herself tumbling forward directly into his lap. "Oh my God," she gasped, her hands bracing against his chest. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to." Strong hands caught her waist, steadying her. She could feel the warmth of him through the layers of fabric, could smell sandalwood and something woodsy she couldn't identify. She was practically straddling the most powerful duke in England in the back of a moving carriage, and she wanted to die of mortification. "Are you hurt?" His voice was low, concerned, and far too close to her ear. No, I'm fine. Just humiliated." She tried to scramble back to her own seat, but the carriage hit another bump and she lurched forward again, this time ending up with her face mere inches from his. She could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could count his eyelashes if she wanted to. "Stop moving," he said quietly. "You'll hurt yourself. I need to get back to my seat. The road is terrible. Wait until we're past this section. Your Grace, I can't just sit in your lap." "It's completely improper. It's also completely unintentional. I'm not going to hold you responsible for bad roads and physics." His hands were still on her waist, warm and steady. "Just stay still for a moment." So she did. She stayed very still in the Duke of Ravenswood's lap while the carriage bounced over what felt like the worst road in all of England. She tried not to think about how solid he felt beneath her, how his hands seemed to fit perfectly at her waist, how this was the closest she'd been to any man in her entire 26 years of life. "I'm sorry," she said again, because she didn't know what else to say. "Stop apologizing. You didn't choose to fall. The road chose for you." That's a very philosophical way of looking at an extremely embarrassing situation. She felt rather than heard his laugh, a rumble in his chest that traveled through where they were pressed together. "I suppose it is. Though I have to say, in all my years of traveling, this is the first time someone has literally fallen into my lap. I'm so honored to be your first lap-falling experience. Your sarcasm is showing, Miss Hartford. My mortification is overwhelming my manners." The carriage finally hit a smoother section of road, and Elizabeth immediately tried to extricate herself. But as she shifted her weight, her foot caught in the hem of her dress, and she started to pitch sideways toward the carriage floor. The Duke moved fast, pulling her firmly back against him, one arm wrapped around her waist and the other braced against the carriage wall. "Don't you dare leave," he said, his voice firm. "Not until this road is actually safe. I'd rather deal with impropriety than with you cracking your head open on the floor. Your Grace, my name is James, and you're going to stay exactly where you are until I say otherwise." Elizabeth's heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could feel it. "That's extremely high-handed of you. That's me being practical. Now, are you going to argue, or are you going to accept that I'm trying to keep you from injuring yourself?" She should argue, should insist on propriety and decorum and all the things she'd been taught since childhood. But his arm was warm around her waist, and for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt safe. "Fine," she said, "but if anyone finds out about this, my reputation will be completely ruined. Then we'll simply have to make sure no one finds out." Before we continue, dear listener, tell me, where are you listening to us right now? From the kitchen while preparing lunch? From the living room, taking a well-deserved break? Or perhaps from the bedroom, relaxing after a long day? Leave it in the comments. We love knowing you're here with us. And if you're enjoying this story, if the romance is touching your heart, please tap the like button right below. It helps us so much to continue bringing beautiful stories like this to you. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now. We have a new exciting story every week, waiting for you. Now let's return to our story because you will not believe what happens next. The story of how Elizabeth Hartford ended up in a carriage with the Duke of Ravenswood was almost as improbable as the fact that she was currently sitting in his lap. 3 days ago, she'd been in London, preparing to return home to the countryside after a disastrous season. At 26, she was firmly on the shelf, too old to be considered a viable marriage prospect and too poor to be interesting to fortune hunters. Her season had been a complete failure, marked by awkward conversations and pitying looks from women who'd married years ago. She'd been at the coaching inn, waiting for the mail coach that would take her home, when the Duke had appeared. She'd recognized him immediately. Everyone in London knew the Duke of Ravenswood, wealthy, powerful, and famously reclusive since his wife's death 5 years ago. "Miss Hartford?" he'd said, and she'd nearly dropped her reticule in shock. "Your Grace, I didn't realize you knew who I was. Your father and I corresponded on matters of estate management. He mentioned you were in London for the season. I wonder if I might impose on you for a favor. A favor? I'm traveling to Yorkshire on urgent business. My usual traveling companion has taken ill, and I find myself in need of a chaperone, or rather in need of someone who could serve as a chaperone should we encounter anyone we know. Your father's estate is on the way to my destination. I could offer you transportation in my private carriage, rather than the mail coach, if you'd be willing to serve in that capacity. It was an unusual request, but Elizabeth was practical enough to recognize a good opportunity. The mail coach was crowded and uncomfortable, while the Duke's private carriage would be spacious and well-sprung. Or so she'd thought. I'd be happy to assist your grace. Excellent. We leave in an hour. That had been this morning. Now, several hours later, she was in his lap trying very hard not to think about how good he smelled, or how strong his arms were, or how this was probably the most scandalous thing she'd ever done. Tell me about your season, he said, breaking the silence. My season? You said you were returning from London. I assume you were there for the marriage market. That's a rather blunt way of putting it, but accurate. She sighed. It was terrible. I'm too old, too poor, and too opinionated to be considered a good match. I spent 3 months being ignored at balls and pitied by former friends who are now married with children. I couldn't wait to leave. Too opinionated. Apparently, men don't like women who have thoughts about things like politics and philosophy and estate management. Then they're idiots. Elizabeth blinked. Excuse me? Any man who doesn't want a woman with thoughts is an idiot. What's the point of marriage to someone you can't actually talk to? Most men seem to think the point is to have someone pretty and agreeable who produces heirs. Most men are fools. The carriage hit another bump, and his arm tightened around her waist. You're better off without them. That's easy for you to say. You're not facing spinsterhood and financial ruin. Financial ruin? She probably shouldn't have said that. But something about sitting in his lap had apparently destroyed her sense of propriety and discretion both. My father's estate is entailed. When he dies, it goes to a distant cousin. My mother passed away years ago. I have a small dowry, but not enough to live on comfortably. Marriage was supposed to be my security. Without it, she shrugged. I'll be dependent on whatever charity my cousin chooses to extend, if he's feeling generous. That's barbaric. That's the law. The law is frequently barbaric. He shifted slightly, adjusting his position so she was sitting more comfortably. What would you do if you could do anything? If money and propriety weren't concerns? Elizabeth considered the question. No one had ever asked her that before. I'd run an estate, she said finally. My father's estate. I've been helping him manage it for years. I know every tenant, every crop rotation, every improvement that needs to be made. But when he dies, all my knowledge goes with it. My cousin will take over, and he'll probably run it into the ground within 5 years, because he doesn't know anything about land management. It's such a waste. It is, he agreed. Have you told your father this? Of course. He's sympathetic but powerless. The entail was set generations ago. There's nothing he can do. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the rattling of the carriage and the horse's hooves on the road. What about you? She asked. What would you do if you could do anything? Go back in time and save my wife. The words were quiet, matter-of-fact, but Elizabeth felt them like a punch to her chest. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to bring up painful memories. You didn't. I think about her every day anyway. One more conversation won't change that. He was quiet for a moment. She died in childbirth. The baby too. I was traveling on business. By the time I got home, they were both gone. I've spent 5 years wondering what would have happened if I'd been there. If I could have done something. Called for a different doctor. Made a different choice. You can't blame yourself for that, can I? I wasn't there when she needed me most. That's on me. Elizabeth twisted to look at him properly. Propriety be damned. You couldn't have known what would happen. And even if you'd been there, you probably couldn't have changed anything. Childbirth is dangerous. Women die. It's awful and unfair, but it's not your fault. He looked at her with those dark eyes, and Elizabeth saw something in them she recognized. Grief, guilt, the weight of things that couldn't be changed. Everyone tells me that, he said. You're the first person I actually believe. Why? Because you're not trying to make me feel better. You're just telling me the truth. There's a difference. The carriage finally rolled onto smoother road, and Elizabeth knew she should move back to her own seat, should restore some sense of propriety to this increasingly improper situation. But she didn't want to, and apparently neither did he, because when she started to shift away, his arm tightened around her waist. The road might get rough again, he said, That's a terrible excuse. It's the best I have. Stay. So she did. And you, dear listener, what would you do in Elizabeth's place? Have you lived through something similar? Do you know someone who went through a situation like this? Tell your story in the comments. We read each one with affection and love knowing your experiences. And if this story is making you sigh, smile, or even shed a tear, share it with someone special. Think of that friend, sister, or daughter who would also love this journey. Send her the link. Love is meant to be shared, isn't it? But let's return, because what is about to happen will leave you speechless. They reached the inn as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. The Duke's driver pulled the carriage into the courtyard, and Elizabeth finally, reluctantly, moved back to her own seat. "Thank you," she said, "for not letting me crack my head open. Thank you for keeping me company. It's been a long time since I've had a conversation that wasn't about business or condolences." The innkeeper bustled out, all bows and "Your Grace" and promises of the best rooms. Arrangements were made. Dinner was ordered. Elizabeth found herself installed in a surprisingly comfortable room with a maid assigned to help her. She changed for dinner, putting on her nicest dress, which wasn't saying much, given her limited wardrobe. But it was clean and fit well, and that would have to be enough. When she came down to the private dining room the Duke had secured, she found him already there, standing by the window looking out at the darkening courtyard. "Miss Hartford," he said, turning, "you look lovely. You're being kind. This dress is 3 years old and has been mended twice. I'm being honest. There's a difference." He pulled out a chair for her. "Shall we?" Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. They talked about everything: politics, philosophy, the agricultural revolution, the challenges of managing large estates. The Duke listened when she spoke, asked intelligent questions, challenged her assumptions in ways that made her think rather than making her feel stupid. It was the best conversation she'd had in months, possibly years. "You're wasted on the marriage market," he said over dessert. "Any man who doesn't see your value is blind. Or practical. I'm 26 with a small dowry and no connections. I'm not exactly a prize. You're intelligent, well-read, and you actually understand estate management. In what world is that not a prize? In the world where youth and beauty matter more than capability. Then it's a stupid world." Elizabeth laughed despite herself. "You're very opinionated for a duke. I'm very opinionated as a person. The title is incidental." He paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why haven't you married? In all these years, surely someone must have shown interest." Elizabeth considered how much to tell him, settled on the truth. "Someone did. When I was 20. His name was Thomas Waverley. He was a second son with charm and debts. He courted me for 6 months, made promises about the future, convinced me he loved me. I believed him. I was an idiot. What happened? He proposed to an heiress 2 weeks after telling me he couldn't live without me. Apparently, he could live without me just fine as long as he had enough money." She smiled, but it felt brittle. "I learned an important lesson about the difference between pretty words and genuine feeling. Every man I've met since then reminds me of him. All surface charm and calculated interest. I'd rather be alone than settle for that." The Duke was quiet for a long moment. Then, "He was a fool. He was practical. I just wasn't wealthy enough to be worth the effort. No, he was a fool. Anyone who had you and chose money instead is the worst kind of fool." Something in his voice made Elizabeth's heart skip. She looked up and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Your Grace, my name is James. Please use it. That's not appropriate. Neither is sitting in my lap for an hour, but we managed that well enough." "That was an accident." "Was it?" He smiled slightly. "The road was bad, yes. But I could have let you scramble back to your seat after the first bump. Could have been a gentleman and endured the impropriety rather than asking you to stay. I didn't, because I didn't want you to go." Elizabeth's pulse was racing. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've spent 5 years in mourning. 5 years alone. 5 years convinced that I'd had my chance at happiness and lost it. And then you literally fell into my lap, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt something other than grief. Your Grace, James, you don't know me. We've known each other for less than a day. I know you're intelligent and honest and brave enough to tell me the truth even when it's uncomfortable. I know you understand loss. I know you make me laugh. I know that sitting with you in that carriage was the best part of my week, possibly my month. And I know that I don't want to say goodbye tomorrow when we reach your father's estate. What are you suggesting?" He stood, walked around the table and offered his hand. "Walk with me, please." She shouldn't. This was dangerous territory. But she put her hand in his anyway. Let him pull her to her feet. Let him lead her out of the dining room and into the inn's garden. The night was cool and clear, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. They walked in silence for a moment, her hand still in his. "I'm not good at this," he said finally. "I was never good at courtship even when I was young, and now I'm out of practice and probably making a complete mess of everything. What are you trying to say? That I want to see you again? That I want to know you better? That sitting in that carriage with you felt like waking up after a very long sleep?" He stopped walking, turned to face her. "I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other. But I also know that I haven't felt this way in 5 years, and I don't want to let it go without at least trying to see where it might lead." Elizabeth looked up at him. This Duke who'd appeared in her life like something from a story, who'd held her when she fell and listened when she spoke and looked at her like she mattered. "I'm leaving for Yorkshire tomorrow," he continued. "I'll be gone for 2 weeks, maybe 3. When I return, may I call on you? May I court you properly? With your father's permission and all the appropriate steps? You barely know me. Then let me get to know you. Let me try. That's all I'm asking." She should say no. Should be practical and sensible and protect herself from potential heartbreak. Should remember Thomas and all the pretty words that had meant nothing. But when she looked at the Duke, at James, she didn't see Thomas. She saw someone who'd been honest about his grief and his loneliness, who'd asked about her dreams and listened to her answers, who'd told her she was wasted on men who couldn't see her value. "Yes," she heard herself say. "You may call on me, you may try." His smile was brilliant. "Thank you. But I'm warning you now, my father will interrogate you. He's very protective. Good, he should be. You deserve someone who will fight for you. And are you willing to fight for me?" "Elizabeth, I'd fight an army for you if I had to." He said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, that she believed him. And when he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, she felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. They returned to the inn shortly after. Propriety restored, goodbyes said. Elizabeth went to her room and lay awake for hours, replaying the day in her mind. The fall into his lap, the conversation, the garden, the promise of courtship to come. It felt like a dream, but the warmth of his hand was still on hers, and the memory of his smile was still vivid in her mind. Maybe, just maybe, this was real. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Elizabeth dressed with care, trying not to think about the fact that she'd be saying goodbye to the Duke in a few hours, that she wouldn't see him again for weeks. When she came down to breakfast, she found him already there, looking slightly rumpled and far too handsome for her peace of mind. "Good morning," he said, standing when she entered. "I trust you slept well?" "Like a rock," she lied. No need to tell him she'd been awake half the night thinking about him. Breakfast was quiet, almost awkward. All the ease of the previous evening seemed to have vanished, replaced by awareness and anticipation. Finally, the carriage was ready. The Duke's driver confirmed that the road to her father's estate was only an hour away. "Are you ready?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be." The journey was different from the previous day. They sat across from each other properly, no convenient accidents to blame for impropriety. But Elizabeth found herself missing the closeness, the warmth of his arms around her waist. "Tell me about your father," he said, breaking the silence. "He's a good man, kind, intelligent. He taught me everything about running the estate because he said knowledge was valuable, even if society didn't recognize it. He's sick now. Not seriously, but enough to make him think about succession and what will happen after he's gone. It makes him melancholy." "Does he know about Thomas? About what happened?" "Yes. He wanted to challenge him to a duel. I had to talk him out of it by pointing out that shooting a second son would cause a scandal we couldn't afford." The Duke laughed. "I like your father already. He'll like you too. Probably. Unless he decides you're another fortune hunter. I'm the one with the fortune in this scenario." "True. That should help." They fell silent again. Elizabeth watched the countryside roll past, familiar landmarks appearing as they got closer to home. "I should warn you," she said suddenly. "My father will ask about your intentions. He's very direct." "Good. My intentions are honorable." "Are they?" He looked at her steadily. "I want to court you properly, get to know you better, and if things progress as I hope they will, I want to marry you." "Are those intentions honorable enough?" Elizabeth's heart stuttered. "You're thinking about marriage?" "After one day. I'm thinking about the possibility of marriage. After one very extraordinary day." He leaned forward. "Elizabeth, I'm not Thomas. I'm not going to court you while looking for someone better. I'm not going to waste your time or play with your feelings. I'm too old and too tired for games. If I say I want to court you, I mean it. If I say I'm interested in marriage, I mean that too. How can you be sure? We barely know each other. I know enough. I know you're everything I didn't know I was looking for. And I know that life is too short to ignore something that feels this right. Before Elizabeth could respond, the carriage slowed and then stopped. They'd arrived at her father's estate. The driver opened the door, and Elizabeth saw her father's butler waiting at the entrance. "Miss Hartford," he said, bowing. "Welcome home. Your father is in his study. He's been expecting you." "Thank you, Morrison." She turned to the Duke. "Would you like to come in? Meet my father?" "I would be honored." They walked into the house together, Morrison leading the way to her father's study. Elizabeth's stomach was full of butterflies. This was happening, really happening. Her father looked up when they entered, his expression moving from pleasure at seeing Elizabeth to surprise at seeing the Duke. "Father," Elizabeth said, "this is the Duke of Ravenswood. He was kind enough to give me transportation from London. Your Grace, this is my father, Baron Hartford." The two men shook hands, each taking measure of the other. "Duke," her father said, "this is unexpected. I hope not unwelcome, my lord. I was wondering if I might speak with you. About your daughter." Her father's eyebrows rose. "About Elizabeth? With your permission, I'd like to call on her when I return from Yorkshire in a few weeks, to court her properly." The room went very still. Elizabeth held her breath. Her father looked at her. "Elizabeth, is this what you want?" "Yes," she said. "I think it is." "Then you have my permission, Your Grace, though I'll want to speak with you more extensively when you return." "Of course, I would expect nothing less." They settled into conversation about estates and management and the business that was taking the Duke to Yorkshire. Elizabeth watched them talk, watched her father's initial wariness transform into what looked like approval. Finally, it was time for the Duke to leave. Elizabeth walked him to the carriage, her father staying diplomatically inside. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. The ride, the conversation, the promise. Thank you for falling into my lap. Best accident of my life." She laughed. "You're ridiculous." "I'm honest. There's a difference." He took her hand, pressed another kiss to her knuckles. "I'll write, and I'll be back as soon as I can. I'll be waiting." He climbed into the carriage, and she watched it roll away down the drive, her hand still warm where he'd kissed it. Her father appeared at her elbow. "Well," he said, "that was interesting. That's one word for it. Do you like him?" "I think I might." "Is that crazy? After one day? Your mother and I knew after 3 hours. Sometimes you just know." He put an arm around her shoulders. "He seems like a good man. Better than that Waverley fool anyway. Much better. Good. Because if he hurts you, I will challenge him to a duel, Duke or not." "Father, I'm serious. You're my daughter. You deserve someone who treats you well." Elizabeth leaned against him, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real, genuine hope for a future that might actually be happy. The weeks that followed were filled with letters. James wrote from Yorkshire. Long, detailed letters about his business there, about the estate he was inspecting, about how much he missed their conversations. Elizabeth wrote back, telling him about the improvements she was making to her father's estate, about books she was reading, about how strange it felt to miss someone she'd known for only a day. Her father watched this correspondence with amusement and approval. "He writes well," he commented after reading one of the letters that the Duke had asked him to review. "Intelligent. Direct. I like him. I'm glad. I like him too. More than like, I think." Elizabeth felt herself blushing. "Maybe. Good. You deserve to be happy, Elizabeth. To be loved by someone who appreciates you." 3 weeks after their parting, a messenger arrived with news that the Duke would be returning the following day. Elizabeth spent that entire day in a state of nervous anticipation, changing her dress 3 times and driving her maid to distraction. When his carriage finally rolled up the drive, she was waiting in the drawing room, trying to look calm and failing completely. Morrison showed him in, and Elizabeth's heart did something complicated in her chest. He looked tired from travel, but happy to be there. His smile when he saw her was warm and genuine. "Miss Hartford," he said, formally bowing. "It's good to see you again." "Your Grace, welcome back." Her father coughed. "I'll leave you two to talk. Elizabeth, the door stays open." "Yes, Father." Once they were alone, or as alone as they could be with the door open and servants moving around, the Duke sat beside her on the settee. "I missed you," he said simply. "I missed you too. Your letters were wonderful. Yours were better. You write with such life, such passion. I found myself looking forward to them more than anything else, even more than your business in Yorkshire, especially more than that. Yorkshire was necessary, but tedious. Your letters were the highlight of my days. They talked for hours, catching up on the weeks apart. Her father joined them for dinner, and the conversation flowed easily among the three of them. Elizabeth watched the Duke charm her father with discussions of crop rotation and tenant welfare, and felt herself falling deeper. This was real. This was happening. This man actually cared about her, about the things that mattered to her, about her thoughts and dreams and opinions. Over the next month, the Duke courted her properly. He called regularly, always with her father's knowledge. He took her driving to local assembly rooms, to dinner with neighboring families. He was attentive without being overwhelming, respectful while making his interest clear. And slowly, carefully, Elizabeth let herself believe, let herself hope, let herself fall completely in love with a man who'd literally caught her when she fell. One evening, 2 months after their first meeting, he asked her to walk in the garden. Her father waved them off with a knowing look. "Elizabeth," he said once they were alone among the roses, "I need to ask you something." "What?" He took both her hands in his. "I love you. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you fell into my lap and apologized for it. I've spent 2 months getting to know you better, and everything I learned just makes me more certain. I want to spend my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to argue with you about estate management and philosophy and everything else. I want to give you the chance to run an estate the way you've always dreamed of. I want everything with you." Elizabeth's eyes were filling with tears. "James, will you marry me? Will you be my wife? Will you let me love you for the rest of my life?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Thank God. I was terrified you'd say no." "Why would I say no? I love you too. Completely. I tried not to, tried to be sensible and careful, but I couldn't help it. Thank God for that too." He kissed her then, tender and sweet, and Elizabeth felt every piece of her heart click into place. This was right. This was real. This was the love she'd stopped believing in. They married 3 months later in a ceremony that was small but perfect. Her father walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes. The Duke, James, looked at her like she was the only person in the world. They honeymooned at his estate in Yorkshire, the same one he'd been inspecting when they met. He showed her every corner of it, asked for her opinion on improvements, listened when she suggested changes. "This is yours now," he said one evening as they looked out over the grounds. "To manage however you see fit. You have full authority. You're giving me an estate to run? I'm giving my wife the chance to do what she's always been brilliant at. There's a difference." The first year of their marriage was an adjustment. Elizabeth had never run an estate entirely on her own before, and the Yorkshire property was larger and more complex than her father's. But she threw herself into the work with enthusiasm, implementing changes and improvements with his full support. He traveled to London regularly for Parliament, and Elizabeth often accompanied him. She found herself enjoying the social season in a way she never had before. When you were a duchess with a husband who adored you, suddenly people wanted to hear your opinions on politics and philosophy. "It's amazing," she told her best friend Sarah one afternoon over tea. "The same people who ignored me 2 years ago now hang on my every word. Nothing about me has changed except my title." "That's society for you," Sarah said. "Shallow and ridiculous. But at least now you can use your position to actually do something useful." And she did. Elizabeth became known for her work improving conditions for tenant farmers. She wrote articles about agricultural innovation that were published in respected journals. She advised other landowners on estate management. She made a difference. But more than the work, more than the social success, Elizabeth treasured her marriage. He was everything she'd hoped for and more. He listened when she talked about her day. He asked her opinion on political matters and actually implemented her suggestions. He made her laugh. He held her when she cried. He loved her completely. On their 5th anniversary, they hosted a ball at the Yorkshire estate. Elizabeth stood in the ballroom she'd designed herself, watching the guests dance and talk and enjoy themselves, and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost overwhelmed her. "Penny, for your thoughts," he said, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "I was just thinking about how different my life is from what I expected. 5 years ago, I was convinced I'd end up a spinster dependent on my cousin's charity. Now I'm here, with you, running an estate, making a difference, happy. All because you fell into my lap. All because you wouldn't let me leave. Best command I ever gave." He clinked his glass against hers. "To terrible roads and excellent accidents. to dukes who catch you when you fall, to wives who make every day an adventure. They drank, and Elizabeth thought about how strange life was, how one bad road had led to everything good in her life, how a moment of complete mortification had transformed into a love story. Their happiness only deepened with time. They had 4 children, 2 daughters and 2 sons, each one inheriting their parents' intelligence and strong will. The estate flourished under Elizabeth's management, becoming a model for progressive agricultural practices. Their partnership became legendary in their circle, a marriage that truly was a meeting of equals. Elizabeth's father lived to see his grandchildren, passing peacefully in his sleep when the eldest was 10. His cousin inherited the entailed estate as expected and ran it into the ground within 3 years, exactly as Elizabeth had predicted. But by then, it didn't matter. She had her own legacy to build. The Duke's mother, who'd initially been skeptical about her son remarrying, became one of Elizabeth's staunchest supporters. "You're exactly what he needed," she told her daughter-in-law one afternoon. "Someone to bring him back to life, someone to challenge him, someone to love him the way he deserves." Years later, when their children asked how they met, Elizabeth would tell them the whole story. The bad road, the fall, the command to stay, the courtship and the marriage and the life they'd built together. "The moral of the story," she'd say, "is that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. Your father caught me when I fell, and he's been catching me ever since." "That's very romantic, Mother," their eldest daughter would say, "but also deeply embarrassing." "You literally fell into his lap." "I know. Best fall of my life." And he would add that sometimes you had to be willing to look ridiculous to find something real. That dignity was overrated compared to happiness, that he'd take a wife who fell into his lap over a perfect courtship any day. On their 20th anniversary, they returned to that inn where they'd first dined together, the same private dining room, the same garden where he'd first spoken of courtship. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, "asking a stranger to marry you after knowing her for one day?" "Never." "Best decision I ever made. Even better than letting you stay in my lap. That wasn't really your decision. I was stuck there. You could have fought harder to get back to your seat. You didn't. You stayed because you wanted to. Maybe I did. Definitely you did. I could tell. You're very confident for someone who literally ordered me not to leave. I'm very confident because I was right. Keeping you there was the smartest thing I've ever done." She kissed him, there in the garden where it had all begun, and thought about how grateful she was for bad roads and terrible timing, and a duke who'd refused to let her fall. Their legacy extended beyond their own happiness. The Yorkshire estate became known as a model of progressive land management. Elizabeth's articles influenced a generation of landowners. Their children grew up seeing their mother run a major estate, and their father support her completely, and they carried those lessons into their own lives. Their eldest daughter became an advocate for women's property rights. Their son revolutionized agricultural techniques on the family's other estates. Their youngest daughter married a diplomat and used her position to advocate for education reform. Their second son became a professor of economics, crediting his mother's management skills as his inspiration. All of them learned from their parents that love was partnership, that marriage worked best when both people brought their full selves to it, that sometimes the best things in life came from unexpected moments. Elizabeth never forgot Thomas Waverley, but she stopped thinking of him with pain. Instead, she thought of him with something almost like gratitude. If he hadn't broken her heart, she wouldn't have been returning home that day, wouldn't have been at that coaching inn, wouldn't have agreed to travel with a duke she barely knew, wouldn't have fallen into the lap of the man she'd spend the rest of her life loving. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a ball. Family and friends gathered to celebrate 3 decades of marriage. Elizabeth stood beside her husband, now gray-haired but still handsome, and looked around at the life they'd built. "Not bad for an accident," she whispered. "Best accident in the history of accidents," he whispered back. "I'd do it all again, every moment. Even the embarrassing parts? Especially the embarrassing parts. Those were my favorite." We're almost reaching the end of this exciting journey. But if you loved the romance of Elizabeth and James, I have wonderful news. We have dozens of other stories waiting for you here on the channel. Breathtaking historical romances, heartwarming second chances, unlikely loves that seem impossible until they happen, each story more exciting than the last. After finishing this one, scroll down and check out our playlists. I'm sure you'll find your next favorite story. And don't forget, activate the notification bell. That way you receive an alert whenever we publish a new story. Because let's be honest, you already know you'll want the next one, right? Now yes, let's get to the moment you were waiting for, the ending your heart asked for. Elizabeth Hartford, now Elizabeth Thornton, Duchess of Ravenswood, lived another 30 years after that anniversary ball. She saw her grandchildren grow, saw her reforms implemented across England, saw the world change in ways she'd never imagined. But through it all, the constant was her husband, her partner, the man who'd caught her when she fell and had been catching her ever since. When he died, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 85, Elizabeth sat beside him and held his hand and thought about all the years they'd had, all the conversations and arguments and laughter and love. "Thank you," she whispered, "for the bad road, for the command to stay, for every day since then. Thank you for catching me." She lived another 5 years after that, long enough to see her youngest grandchild married, long enough to finish her memoirs, which became required reading for anyone studying agricultural history, long enough to know that the life she and her husband had built would continue long after they were both gone. On her last day, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, someone asked her what the secret to a happy marriage was. "Fall into the right person's lap," she said with a smile. "And when they tell you not to leave, listen." It wasn't the advice anyone expected, but it was the truth. Sometimes love started with accidents, with bad roads and worse timing and moments of complete mortification. But if you were brave enough to stay, if you found someone worth staying for, those accidents could become the foundation of everything beautiful in your life. And so ends the story of Elizabeth and James, a journey about unexpected moments leading to extraordinary love, about the courage to trust again after heartbreak, about finding someone who sees your value when the world overlooks it, about partnership and respect and the kind of love that grows from genuine connection. I hope this story touched your heart as much as it touched mine bringing it to you. If it moved you, if you sighed, if you smiled along with our characters, leave your like. It motivates us to continue. And tell us in the comments, what was your favorite moment? What touched you most? We want to know. Each comment is read with affection. Are you missing it already? Don't worry. We have a new story coming very soon. Subscribe and activate notifications so you don't miss it. And while you wait, explore our channel. We have so many other beautiful stories waiting for you. Thank you so much for your company, for choosing to spend this time with us, for opening your heart to one more love story. Until the next journey, dear listener, may your heart always be open to love, to hope, and to the good moments life reserves for us. A warm hug, and see you soon.